reasons, not only because of the Bab al-Mandab strike, because of Yemen situation, because of Djibouti, and we know that Ethiopia is a key country for stability, that Ethiopia is a headquarters of African Unity Organization, and that many things what's going on in Ethiopia, in fact, affect Africa as a continent, because Ethiopia is second large by population after, I think, Nigeria. And situation in Ethiopia affect, I think, the entire region from Somalia, Somaliland, Sudan, then issue about Nile as a river, and many, let's say, many conflicts all around Ethiopia and within Ethiopia, and of course, ethnic composition of the country. I have a great, as I said, great honor and privilege to greet all of you, and I would like to call our distinguished colleague Greg Copley to give keynote introduction. Greg, floor is yours, sir. Please unmute microphone. Greg, unmute the microphone. Not yet. You have down on the left side.
There we go. There we go. Well, thank you very much, Darko, and it's a great pleasure to be with you, and particularly on this important topic, which I've been living with for some years. And the really important aspect of this is that we are living in what is a part of a very global information dominance campaign being waged to achieve certain outcomes. And this is not unusual in today's form of warfare. But what we are seeing in the international media in particular, and this is governing many governments' reactions, is that we are seeing a very, very biased coverage of the Ethiopian situation. Let me step back a little to say that the situation is not just about the civil war in Ethiopia. Indeed, the civil war in Ethiopia is symptomatic of a much larger conflict going on in the region and globally. The situation is that the Tigrayan rebellion and the Oromo Liberation Front rebellion and the like have for many years, particularly in the case of the Oromos, been sponsored by foreign governments to achieve either the breakup of Ethiopia or to enable Ethiopia to be constrained in controlling the flow of waters from the Blue Nile down to Sudan and Egypt in particular. But the reality is that Ethiopia has traditionally been the anchor in the Horn of Africa, and particularly in the post-World War II era was critical in helping to stabilize the lower Red Sea region, as Darko pointed out, around the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb. And this is critical to the stability of the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, the Red Med sea lane of communication, which is one of the most vital sea routes in the world, certainly vital for European and North American trade with the Pacific and vice versa. So basically, this is critical, a critical area of competition, as it was during the Cold War. And we saw during the Cold War the great competition to control both northern Somalia and what was formerly British Somaliland and Ethiopia. And this actually was significant. Today, though, we've seen the most determined foreign intervention to destabilize Ethiopia that we've seen since the Italian invasion of 1935 or the Italian invasion of 1896. Now, what we've got is the TPLF, which today said that it was withdrawing its troops from the Amhara region and the Afar regions of Ethiopia, neighboring states to the Tigray region, and that they hoped the head of the TPLF, Debretsion Gebremichael, said that he hoped this would be an avenue towards a peace settlement. And in so doing, the TPLF information apparatus threw out the objective that this would put the ball back in the Ethiopian government's court and put them on the defensive and show that the TPLF was an instrument of peace. The reality is we have to ask why the TPLF was in the Amhara region or the Afar region in the first place. And the answer to that lies in the fact that it's when the TPLF control of the Ethiopian government collapsed in 2018, having ruled and governed the entirety of Ethiopia since 1991, the TPLF was reluctant to give up power and the access to the riches of the country. So it began a civil war. And now what we have to look at is not what has been in the media of late, the last 2 years in particular, but at the realities on the ground. Firstly, the TPLF is a strenuously Marxist organization. It was created to break up Ethiopia in the first place. And it was only in 1990 and 1991 when the TPLF found itself with 2 battalions of Sudanese armor in Addis Ababa that the United States government of the day said that it was handing control of Ethiopia over to the TPLF. TPLF said, well, we're only here to liberate Tigray. But the US government said, well, look, we're preoccupied with the breakup of the Soviet Union, so you guys go ahead and run Ethiopia. Well, the TPLF did that, but stole a lot of money in the meantime, but has subsequently repeated and in fact increased its fervor as a genocidal organization. And I say genocidal, I say that in a deliberate understanding of the legal terminology of genocide. They have avowedly claimed that they wished to destroy and kill all Amhara people and people who advocated the unity of Ethiopia as a union of some 60 to 80 ethnic and national groups. And they attempted to carry out that exercise. At the same time, they basically said that when they started their armed rebellion against the government of Ethiopia in the last couple of years, they always said that the Ethiopian government was attacking them. And what was interesting was that in January of this year, the United States government started agreeing with them. And you have to ask why that was. Well, the reason why is that during the Obama administration, the US asked the TPLF-led Ethiopian government of that day for some assistance in landing rights and the like for launching drone operations against Somali terrorists and so on. All well and good. Well, the TPLF, which was running the government at the time, demanded of the US that it provide cash, that it provide training and weapons for the TPLF's own militia, not the Ethiopian armed forces, but the TPLF's own militia, the SS, if you like, of the TPLF, and give US passports to the TPLF leadership, which the US did. So it's estimated that with that money and those resources and with other monies taken by the TPLF during its decades of control of Ethiopia, that they took about $30 billion out of the Ethiopian treasury. And that was sufficient to set up information operations in London and Washington, D.C. in particular, and to literally start to control the dialogue. Now, when the war broke into a kinetic action over the past year and a half, the only access to the battlefield was via the TPLF's controlled information resources. The State Department, which had its long-standing friendship with the TPLF leadership, supported this. They insisted that the US be able to send aid to the Tigrayan region, which they said was undergoing a humanitarian crisis, which indeed it was, at the hands of the TPLF itself. And we saw that US aid was being sent down to the Tigray region on some 200 trucks, which the US government insisted would be provided by the Ethiopian government. So as it turned out, that aid was sent entirely to the TPLF, not to the Tigrayan population. And the trucks provided by the Ethiopian government were then taken by the TPLF and used as part of their military logistical capability, enabling them, in fact, to push their offensive into the Amhara regions and the like. And again, their intention was to destroy Amhara and Afar regions, and also to topple the government of Dr. Abiy Ahmed Ali. Now, what we're seeing is, what we're seeing now is that the U.S. government began reacting against the Ethiopian government, even though the Ethiopian government has now been confirmed as being elected by the most transparent election in Ethiopia since 1974, since before 1974, when the coup occurred against Emperor Haile Selassie. So we've got a situation where we had an election which was fairly credible, being disavowed by the United States. The United States called for the moving of the African Union headquarters from Addis Ababa to Cairo, bearing in mind that Cairo was one of the main antagonists against Ethiopia, and particularly had been funding the Oromo Liberation Front. And we saw the United States then impose sanctions on Ethiopia because it refused to allow the US to put its aid where it wanted into the TPLF. So we're seeing an interesting situation where the US is supporting the TPLF without any public statement as to the strategic objectives of the United States in this region. At the same time, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a visit to Africa, which was supposed to be a multi-country sweep through Africa to muster support for the US in its bid to overthrow the Ethiopian government. In the end, they were only able to go to 3 countries, Nigeria, Kenya, and Senegal, and received zero support from African states for this supposed diplomatic initiative to overthrow the Ethiopian government and to move the African Union headquarters. So the United States has been failing to gain traction there. It's failed to state its strategic goals for its actions in Ethiopia. And at the same time, this has allowed the People's Republic of China, Russia, and Turkey and Iran to make great gains inside Ethiopia, which has had nowhere else to turn. And the Russian and PRC governments have both used their vetoes to stop United States-led initiatives to impose sanctions on Ethiopia and to allow the UN at US behest to create an intervention force. The State Department then said that it was going to send 2 battalions of US National Guard troops, which in other words, troops controlled by the individual states in the United States, over to Djibouti to intervene in Ethiopia, presumably on behalf of the TPLF. The state governments, which control the National Guard in the United States, objected to this on legal grounds, saying that this was not a lawful order, and so that option was withdrawn by the State Department. Then, and it has not yet been announced formally, the State Department requested that it put 2 battalions of Rangers, special forces, into Djibouti to be able to act to, quote, protect US citizens in Ethiopia. Now, the Djiboutian government, which has long favored the restoration of close imperial ties with Ethiopia, because it was once part of Ethiopia, the Djiboutian government and the President Gala, said publicly that the US would not be allowed to launch military operations into Ethiopia from Djibouti. So we've got this standoff where the only strategic gains being made are being made by really Russia, Turkey, and the People's Republic of China. Now, the United States has not, the government has not backed down on this and is likely to continue to support this. But the US position is being undermined finally because independent journalists are now being able to go to the front and into the fighting and see the extent of the TPLF atrocities
Gregory,
against civilians.
excuse me, please. Would you like to come close? Come to the end, please.
Yes, absolutely. So we've got the situation now where the information blockade is being broken. The Economist last week had an extensive report outlining the reality of the atrocities on the ground. And this is really throwing open the question as to what has been going on in the region, and highlighting the fact that the TPLF troops have been forced out of Amhara just in the last couple of days, and they're trying to make a virtue of that by saying that they're withdrawing their troops from the Amhara region. In fact, they've been driven out by the final mobilization of the Amhara and Afar people in support of the government's efforts to stop this civil war. So we've got a situation which is drawing in the major powers, and we haven't really discussed the engagement of Egypt in this, because Egypt has been a primary driver in this because it needs more water from the Nile. The question has to be asked, though, of the Egyptian government: what is the gain for Egypt by breaking up Ethiopia, even destroying the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? It will not release any more waters into the Nile, and the problem of Egypt's water shortage will not be solved. Egypt's water shortage is caused by the massive, literally the quadrupling of Egypt's population in the past few decades, but of course being forced to exist on the same water supply it has always had. So hopefully that gives some narrative there which differs from the public media perception. I have a lot of people on the ground in Ethiopia, and have had for decades, even during the Derg period and before that. So we really have a strong understanding of this situation. What is of concern is the lack of clarity by the major powers, particularly the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg, so much. Next on our list is Dr. Jonathan Levy, and the subject is Ethiopia, can the empire survive? Dr. Levy, floor is yours.
Thank you, Darko. And I'm going to kind of back up with the lens because Greg Copley's, was just fantastic with the current events that you're not going to hear anywhere else about Ethiopia. I'm going to back up a little bit and give you more of a zoom out of the situation and theory on it. By way of disclosure, I've been the attorney for an organization called Global Alliance for Justice, the Ethiopian Cause. It's been sponsored by His Royal Highness Prince Ermeus, grandson of Haile Selassie. So what I wanted to say was, to begin with, Ethiopia is really unique among modern African countries. At a time when the rest of Africa was being carved up and subjugated by the Congress of Berlin in 1878, Ethiopia was well into the process of expanding its reunified empire. So it's really, we think of Ethiopia as an African country, but really Ethiopia is completely different than the rest of Africa. It's really, you can think of it more in terms of a modern sort of European country in the sense of politics. So the great work of restoring the Ethiopian empire began in the 1850s by Emperor Theodorus II, who reinvigorated Ethiopia in time to prevent colonization by the Europeans. And he dealt with the English, and this is going back into the 1860s, 1870s, on a basis of state-to-state comity and diplomacy. And while he eventually lost the battle with the English, and it's notable the English withdrew from Ethiopia. They did not occupy Ethiopia, and though Theodorus did not survive that conflict, Ethiopia remained a growing empire. And that brings us to the next great emperor, who was Johannes IV, who routed an Egyptian invasion in 1876. And he ended an armed standoff with Italy via state-to-state diplomacy. So again, you see Ethiopia dealing as a co-equal diplomatically with the European powers at a time when the Europeans were just simply dominating Africa. Johannes IV was succeeded by Menelik II, who arguably is the greatest of the modern Ethiopian emperors. And he, of course, is famous for destroying an invading Italian army in 1898. So a great military victory by an African power over European colonizers. And that really cemented Ethiopia's place as a nation state on par with European nations, albeit maybe not as industrialized or modern, but on par diplomatically. And Menelik continued a policy of territorial expansion and perhaps subjugation of ethnic minorities, including the Oromo, who have played quite a role in Ethiopia. And arguably, if Ethiopia had not become an imperial country and expanded its territories, these territories would have been picked off by the British, the French, or the Italians who were already present in the region. Modernization and expansion of the empire continued, of course, under Haile Selassie, who ascended the throne in 1930. However, in 1936, the Italians, with the blessing of the Vatican, invaded Ethiopia with few or no consequences. The occupation was caught up in the Second World War and ended with a Ethiopian victory in 1941 and the restoration of Haile Selassie. And the Ethiopian Empire, because that's what it was, reached its fullest point with the addition of Eritrea in 1952 with the blessing of the United Nations. The United Nations essentially agreed Eritrea could be unified with Ethiopia. Haile Selassie also sought the addition of Somalia, which he was not able to obtain. So you have Ethiopia as a huge empire in the 1950s with a proud heritage and unbroken history and culture extending back to ancient times and well documented. So Ethiopia became a beacon of liberty in colonial Africa, perhaps the first among independent African nations, the first among peers, which is why, and for many reasons, the African Union was based in Addis Ababa. And for a while there, Ethiopia was, the preeminent African country. However, the stress of the Cold War brought about hard times for kings and emperors all over the world. So we see the kings of Egypt, Iraq, Libya, and the Shah of Iran all being deposed by socialist-inspired nationalism and Cold War politics. Ethiopia itself was struggling with a long-term uprising in Eritrea, and by 1974, the end came for Haile Selassie and the empire when the communist-inspired Derg took over and quickly deposed the monarch. However, the Derg were ruthless. They were ruthless Marxists. They held together Ethiopia while fighting wars in Eritrea and with Somalia over the Ogaden region. And the Derg, in turn, however, were removed by the Tigrayan-dominated government in 1991. So you had Ethiopia holding fairly well together after the fall of the emperor with a Marxist government, and then you have the Derg, who were then removed by another Marxist-dominated government, except it was the Tigrayan one, and which is notable because Tigray is a medium-sized province, but its leadership has been instrumental in intervening in Ethiopian politics. In 1993, we see the stress of the empire falling apart. I'd say it. We see Eritrea successfully becoming independent in 1993. You have the Tigrayans clinging to power despite separatist disputes in Oromo and Ogaden region. And nonetheless, as Greg Copley alluded to, you see them obtaining some prestige on a regional basis by acting as sort of a cat's paw in Somalia and a Western proxy intervening in Somalia. And you see increased Western investment and Saudi investment and others coming into Ethiopia under that Tigrayan government. The Tigrayan dominated government fell in a democratic election, more or less, that after a 2-year brutal dispute with the Oromo. And notably in Oromo, Aramo Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed became in there and became the head of Ethiopia. And while this was applauded in the West and elsewhere, perhaps it was not the best way to hold together an empire of diverse people. Can an empire really be held together by democratic elections? For an empire of subjugated people and nations to survive the loss of an emperor, I would posit a similarly ruthless regime must take its place. So, for example, the Soviet Union succeeded the Russian Empire and held together Russia. The People's Republic of China restored the Chinese Empire. But both of these, both the Soviet Union and the PRC, were not democratic institutions, but yet they held together and restored these great empires. The Derg were ruthless. They imposed a red terror, but they kept Ethiopia intact. But we see post-Derg, the Ethiopia falling prey to what I call sort of an inertia, where its parts and appendages want to secede. And there's long-standing disputes with the Oromo in the Ogaden region. These has been, there is foreign intervention. Certainly, Egypt and Somalia both have interests in trying to fiddle around and break up Ethiopia or weaken it. And the most recent events involving the Tigrayans certainly bode poorly for Ethiopia's future as a state, in my opinion. We have a coup d'etat or an attempted coup d'etat, as reported in the West, in the Amara region in 2019, with casualties on both sides and unrest throughout Ethiopia, especially the Oromo region and among other minorities. And of course, the main event being the Tigrayan War, which is now engulfing all of Ethiopia, spreading outside the border with reported skirmishes in Somalia and Sudan, and of course, Eritrean intervention against the Tigrayans to support the central government. So, what was a preemptive move by the central government to crush Tigrayan separatism seems to have backfired simply because perhaps the central government was not ruthless enough, and it's yielded a long-term civil war with the attendant human rights abuses. With a central government that now seems to be not only facing the Tigrayans, but other minorities, such as the Oromo, which see this as a chance to maybe successfully secede or become de facto states. So Abiy Ahmed, far from becoming the savior of modern Ethiopia, has become a catalyst for civil war. I would say, unless a strong man can emerge, the logical consequence of this is the final dissolution of the empire, which has been going on for decades, and it may fall into various components, 3 to 5 de facto states, and it's also possible that a permanently weakened Ethiopia might be preserved, like Somalia is sort of preserved in amber, given the UN penchant for preserving post-colonial borders at all costs. So you would see an Ethiopia on the map, but with 3 or 4 de facto states inside it, because of the UN system continuing to recognize a central government. I would say the horses may have already left the gate. The appetite for intervention in the Horn of Africa in what many look at as a localized power struggle may indeed be minimal. And especially we need to take into consideration U.S. appetite for this post-Afghanistan and in the middle of the pandemic may be rather weak. So a weaker, divided Ethiopia could certainly be manipulated and controlled by foreign interests. And as long as foreign nationals and multinational properties are not affected in a big way, this may be allowed to continue. In closing, I'd say all empires die eventually. Some are reborn, like Russia and China, but the standard is that most empires become history. The Spanish Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, all history. Ethiopia has a proud history going back centuries, but this was weakened by communist-inspired wrecking, and the unifying figure of the emperor is but an old memory to many. Local interests may soon trump national ones if that national identity as Ethiopians become diluted. So while if Ethiopians continue to see themselves as Tigrayans or Oromos first, the national identity will be lost, and Ethiopia could, within our lifetimes, become no more. So in closing, I'd say the empire requires an emperor or an emperor-like figure to restore it. And lacking one, the inertia of history tells us that empires eventually dissolve into their components. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much. It was very educational from you and Greg. I think we'll have a great discussion on and so next on our list is the Colonel Shaul Shai. Is it Shaul with us? Okay, I'm sorry. Next on our list is Professor Nomikos. I see Nomikos, John brother is on a screen already. And so I know why this smile is there, but I am sure, John, that you don't have your assistant as I. So you can, the Mitza say hello to you, and where is your assistant, John? So.
Well, this is downstairs.
So
Okay.
John, floor is yours, please.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Good evening. It's always a pleasure to see, familiar face, which I do appreciate all of you. First of all, I was very happy to listen to Gregory and to Jonathan, but my comment is about, does African Union need an intelligence risk assessment mechanism? Just take another perspective, not talking only domestically about on foreign affairs about, Ethiopia, but let me give you just a brief assessment. What is African Union? Well, I just decided to compare in 1991 what's happening. Our Serbian colleges, special brother, Darko. In 1991, the European Union faced, the breakup of the Yugoslavian crisis. What happened? It was not prepared how to face it, and they reacted spasmodically without having any mechanism to respond to the breakup of Yugoslavia, and or better yet, to find any peaceful solution. So I think one of the biggest intelligence failure for the European Union was the breakup of the Yugoslavia in 1991. Now, what do we see today in Africa? Security threats. And what is the capacity to respond? In Ethiopia, the African Union is a continental union, consists of 55 member states. Of course, they are African. And ironically, which is what we have today in the Ethiopia crisis, the African Union is having its headquarters in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia. And it was founded on 26 May 2001. So you can see it's coincided with 9/11 in the United States in 2001. So, and talking about the African Union, one of the objectives is to achieve greater unity, cohesion, and solidarity between the African states and African nations, as well to protect borders and to promote peace, security, and stability on the African continent. So I ask myself, what does the African Union based in Addis Ababa does for the Ethiopia crisis? I don't have the answer. But do we see African Union to prevent conflict such as Ethiopia? I'm sure my colleagues, after me, our distinguished Dr. Shaul Shea will elaborate more on this. Because I'm not an expert about, African, just I wanted to see the intelligence failure that happened in the European Union and the African Union that takes place today. Well, just before going on, I just try to point out what is the African security threats in 2021, and of course in the forthcoming year. What we see now, we can see the counter-violent extremism in Chad, Boko Haram in Nigeria, you name it. One of the biggest problems is border security, all right? Sometimes from one Africa state to go to the other, you don't know where to draw the line. The biggest problem, of course, is organized crime and the terrorist jihadi network. You can see it in Somalia, Al-Shabaab and so on. food and water security, one of the biggest problems that we are going to face, and this is going to affect, the migration route all the way from Africa to the warm water. What's the warm water? In the Mediterranean. So the point is coming. And of course, what we see today, the postponement of the Libyan election that was supposed to take on Friday, 24. This is another issue that the African Union should have prepared. The other neighbor state countries, what's going on? Is the Libyan postponing election just another factor for more destabilized issues, or the North Africa is going to go into another turmoil? Should I name illegal migration and human trafficking? You can see it in Greece. You can see it in Belarus. You can see it in Africa, which is a huge thing. I'm not going to talk about the human rights violation because it's everywhere. It's not only in Africa. But one of the biggest problems is climate change. And I end up, with the monitoring disease. The coronavirus is a global one. Ebola is one of the biggest problems on malaria in Africa. What is the role of the African Union try to predict or create any kind of warning mechanism, to the 55 members of the African Union? What do they do there? One of the biggest natural threats in Africa, of course, and we realize this is not an exception to Africa, this is a problem for most of the states, is corruption that penetrates as an institutional cancer into governmental institution in all African Union member states. Therefore, the question is, does African Union need a risk assessment mechanism? Possibly, yes. I don't know if we can compare with the European Union, but I think it will be, a necessity for that. Well, one of my humble recommendations is that African Union needs to establish a network based on African international and independent hub. I want to emphasize that an independent hub for experts and practitioners from African state, academia, intelligence service, and international one. People like us, and more, and beyond us. This independent hub of experts and practitioners, focus on the following. They can make a brainstorming and create a network. Well, first of all, contribute to early warning through open sources material, military and non-military intelligence and diplomatic reporting. Conduct some kind of local regional situation monitoring and risk assessment. In other words, to have a synergy between private and public sector from the European Union, from Israel, from United States, from Canada, and so on. So then this the kind of network, will be the flexibility and provide some warning, to the African Union, which we don't see that powerful in the European Union right now. Provide facility for crisis task force and create a synergy between specialized, again, a specialized African international think tank with African Union members intelligence security community. Do we see that? Possibly not. And finally, I was just reading how the African Union is functioning, and I was quite surprised to see that it will be a good idea if the African Union of these 55 members based in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia could create some kind of a counter-terrorism coordinator, which of course is going to be an African citizen, in order to prepare and submit risk assessment to African Union Council decision makers. Well, this counter-terrorism coordinator could be a network coordinator collecting information, from expert and practitioners, from African state in collaboration with international think tanks that, specialize that. This is some of these, recommendations that I was seeking when I was concentrated my research on the area. And finally, what we see now, we see so many, training courses, exercises, worship in NATO, in the European Union, but we don't see anything so much about Africa. I mean, I'm so happy that, Darko and all of us, focus on this, on the African, policy, especially, in Ethiopia. So Do we need training courses, exercises, network workshop to the policymaker and practitioners put them together on hybrid threat and vulnerability? One of the biggest problems, vulnerabilities on critical infrastructure, electrical, grid, water system, poison the water, because one of the biggest problems there is not only the critical infrastructure, it's the water. Lack of water, lack of food are the problems that, the African Union should warn the rest of the African state how to deal with that. And of course, I don't expect that all the African Union should wait for the humanitarian assistance from the European Union or from the UN, which is good, but they need to have their own, institution, their own, network in order, to be educated and to respond, not to make the same failure that we made in the European Union in 1991 in the breakup of Yugoslavia. And we would expect the United States to come here to be like, a fighter brigade. And then, respecting the time, Africa government will need to improve domestic military effectiveness and the reform. This is one of the biggest problems. Reform the security and intelligence community. I had a chance to read a couple of articles on the Ghana intelligence services and Rwanda, and I see the obstacle and the problems that they have to face, which is more or less, we are facing the Balkan, Latin America, and so on. And finally, Darko, the threats from natural disaster can be encountered, all right? But Islamic or jihadi terrorism and extremism requires international military assistance, at least in the areas that we are discussing today, in Sahel and the Horn of Africa. So I want to believe that establishing an intelligence risk assessment warning system in Africa is a necessity more than ever. All right. So a best practice for them is to see other countries like some of the European Union states, like the United States, like Canada, like Israel, some of the countries that they have, advanced system of risk assessment, and they know how to do it. That's all I want to do. I think I'm in the 10 minutes period, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother John. After three presentations now, the key issue remain who can bring the sides in Ethiopia on one table. Ethiopians, I know Ethiopians are very proud people, and they don't like any kind of the foreign interventions, etc., etc. But the key issue is whether can they actually sit together, or they need someone abroad, like European Union, like United Nations, like whom. Next on our list is Colonel Shao Shai. Thank you, Colonel, to be with us. The topic is Ethiopia conflict in 3 front lines. Colonel Shai, floor is yours.
Thank you, Darko. Good morning
please.
Here in United States. I'm far away from Israel. I would like to open with a short remark. In my last visit in Ethiopia and in the region, I had the impression that if we look at the East Africa, Horn of Africa region, Ethiopia was the source of stability. It was shortly after the historical peace agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, with Prime Minister Abiy that won the Nobel Prize. And the future for Ethiopia and the region was indeed promising. It's amazing or sad to see how different is the situation just about 2 years later. And I think that the previous speakers described in details the internal problem in Ethiopia, and of course I will relate to it briefly. But I think that the current situation is especially complex because the government headed by Prime Minister Abiy had to deal with 3 strategic problems that each of them is serious with significant outcomes to the whole region. And of course, when we will mix them together, it makes the situation in Ethiopia even worse than I think for decades ago. So I would like to start with one point that wasn't mentioned yet, and I'm not sure that it's the most important one, but it's a very risky and severe situation, because it can lead to the problem that I will relate to it, to turn the Ethiopian conflict into a regional conflict with the participation of different players that are engaged in disputes with Ethiopia on several main issues. So, first of all, I would like to relate to the border dispute between Ethiopia and Sudan over the border area of El Fashaga, which is a fertile land on the border that, unfortunately, like in many other places in the African continent, the British Empire left the area without clear border between the then new structure of the region. And so for many decades, this El Fashaga area was open to both Sudanese and Ethiopian villagers that coexisted more or less in peaceful way. In 2007, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia and Omar el-Bashir of Sudan had a kind of agreement. It was called the cooperation agreement, that they decided to maintain the status quo in the region and to postpone the problematic question of the demarcation of the border. And more or less it worked successfully until November 2020, when the new government of Sudan, under the guidelines of the strongman General Burhan, decided to reoccupy the region. They sent in forces, both the Sudanese military and some Sudanese militias. And within a relatively short time, they took over the area almost without resistance of the Ethiopians there. And they captured the territory, they deployed forces, and the situation is that practically El Fashaga now is almost under full control of Sudan. The Ethiopian government was surprised by the Sudanese move, and their response came too late, and some experts claim that the Sudanese liberation or occupation of the El Fashaga was well prepared in advance, and when the civil war in Tigray broke out, this was the golden opportunity for the Sudanese to change the reality on the field. And for the Ethiopians, because of course the first priority now is to deal with the problems with Tigray, so they had limited capabilities to respond to the Sudanese step. And this is the reality in the El Fashaga region. And of course, it remained open to solution in the future, but my concern is to escalation in the near future. And from time to time, we have reports from both sides that they blame each other, that they are attacking each other forces. But this is just one challenge from several that President Abiy had to deal with. The second problem is, of course, the internal civil war. And I think that this is the first priority and the main challenge, not only to the Abiy regime, but to the stability of Ethiopia. Because for a long time, when we look at the ethnic map in Ethiopia, we know that the Oromo and the Amhara are about 60% of the Ethiopian population. That actually is about 100 million people. And the Tigrayans that were in power for several decades were just between 6 to 7% of the population. And of course, there are many other problems that, again, I think that's one of the former speaker mentioned, the Ogaden problem and other problems, that the whole structure of the Ethiopian country is based on a kind of balance of power between the different tribes and the different power brokers. And unfortunately, in the last year, something had been broken. So the new reality is really strange. When we look at the war in Tigray, and I'm not going now to analyze who is on the upper hand so far because things are very dynamic, but we can see there a very strange coalition that fighting the TFLP. It's on one hand the government forces, some militias of the Amhara, and Eritrean forces. So just 3 years ago, Eritrea and Ethiopia were enemies. And in these days, Eritrea deeply involved in the fighting in Tigray on the side of the Ethiopian government. And I think that it's very problematic because it's one of the signs how easily this internal conflict can turn to be a regional one. So even at this part of my presentation, I mentioned at least 3 countries that are involved in this conflict for different reasons. But at the end, they are engaged together because, for instance, refugees from Tigray are escaping into the Sudanese territory. Ethiopian government blames the Sudanese that they are supporting the Tigrays, and this turmoil in the region can lead to a bigger explosion. The third point that I would like to just highlight it, because I know that Dr. Barak is going to discuss it in details. But when we look at the Grand Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile that Ethiopia is building for almost a decade, and try to gain a kind of agreement in the triangle of Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, it reached a critical phase at this time. I mean, the building of the dam is almost finished. In July, they made the second filling of the reservoir behind the dam. Without the agreement with Sudan and Egypt, the downstream countries that are, of course, partners to the way to share the water of the Nile. And all the efforts to reach an agreement between the three parties so far failed. So as a part of the attempts to put pressure on the Ethiopian government, we could see that Egypt and Sudan signed a security agreement between the two countries. And in the last year, they conducted 3 exercises in Sudan that Egyptian special forces and Air Force took part alongside the Sudanese forces. So, of course, Egypt and Sudan claimed that the problem of the dam should be resolved in political measures, but on the other hand, they send the messages that there are other options as well. And now I added the fourth country to the complex situation.
Shaul, please come to the end close, please.
Yes, this is the end. So what should be done to diffuse this situation? I think that it's necessary, especially for the United States, in spite of the fact that they are tired from wars in the rest of the world. But I think that the United States, the EU, and the UN has to deal in a comprehensive way simultaneously with all the 3 problems to maintain the negotiations over the dam, to try to open a channel of negotiation under the auspice of the European Union or the African Union or the UN between Sudan and Ethiopia, and to try to put the pressure on the different parties in the internal conflict in Ethiopia to come to the negotiation table and to stop the civil war. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaul. I think we shall publish the book after this conference, definitely. Next on our list is Professor Lombardi. Professor Lombardi,
yeah,
the floor is yours.
Yes, here I am. Thanks, Darko. So I will keep in my 10 minutes. I want to thank Gianluca, who cooperated with me to write this paper. I will be brief. We wrote a larger paper that, if you wish, we can share later. So I start from the installation of the Prime Minister Abiy in Ethiopia, because immediately seemed to bring a breath of fresh air and stability to Ethiopia, and from here to the Horn of Africa. Abiy presented himself as a novelty, both ethnically, after a decade of representative of the federal government of Tigrinya ethnicity, both on the political level, after decades of conflict with Eritrea. The new prime minister in 2018 managed to close the conflict. We, the Westerners, celebrate this desirable scenario by awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Abiy in 2019, confirming Ethiopia as the new example of African democracy. But our dreams, European dreams, does not last long. The war in Tigray breaks out in November 2020 and upset the card of the Horn of Africa and the scenario of the region. Remember, neither internal ethnic fragmentation nor external pressure are alien to the conflict. In short, a kaleidoscope of ethnic groups, 5 the majors, that never stopped using each other violence in the past year, even when the country was told as pacified. in the recent year. If then to the characteristics of the internal fragmentation, we add the interest of external division, the stability of the Ethiopia, but the entire Horn of Africa, assume a very relevant political value, but inevitably, let me say, a new Ethiopia as concrete possibility. Prime Minister Abiy has a central role in all this. Abiy's parents are Oromo and Amara. He is a Pentecostal evangelical religion and he is married to Zinash Tayewech, Amara and of Protestant religion. Abiy is very attached to Ethiopian history, to the great kings and emperors such as Menelik II, Amara Emperor, victorious in Adwa, who became a bulwark of colonial penetration in the Horn of Africa. The Prime Minister often resorts to this narrative. It is an almost messianic dream to save Ethiopia again from a new Western invasion. Abiy aims coup d'etat, remember, is on November 22 of this year, when he transferred power to his deputy, Demeke Mekonnen, to dress the army uniform and lead the counter-offensive against the PLF and the Oromo force of the Ola. With this personal initiative, the Prime Minister, the NDF, the Ethiopian forces, has gone from forces recruitment among Ethiopians to being able to count on a mass of volunteers. It was an incredible symbolic resistance against colonialism, the ancient Italian colonialism, and the modern foreign invaders made by Abiy. The Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's exemplary narrative created in Ethiopia a perception of national unity based on the threat of foreign invasion of the country led by Americans, and to a lesser extent to the British and French, who used the TPLF as a kind of mercenaries at their services. And this initiative bring together the president of Somalia, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, and the Eritrean, Isaiah Afwerki. It is interesting. It is an interesting reversal of the tradition of colonialist front, which identified in the old powers present in the Horn in the last century, and now leaves room for the emerging powers in Africa, favoring a new form of colonialism of the new century with the same collaboration of the local African power. Abiy is building a very strong axis with Qatar, Iran, Turkey, Russia, and in particular China, all the countries supplying weapons to the Ethiopian Federation and the large economic stakeholders in the Horn of Africa. I have to pass to the light and dark of the ground, but I just want to underline, to mention the internal problems related to the various factors that we have to know. For example, the Oromo issue, or the opposition to the government by small Amara groups, and the difference in vision of the future united Ethiopia would be federal, confederal, imperial, the role of foreign powers supporting Abiy, but also the role of the Islamic world. And we cannot forget the split in the Christian world, Catholic and Orthodox, and the problem of human rights. Among that, of course, the Oromo factor. The Oromo are split in between supporting with the Ola, the PLF, and most of them supporting the Prime Minister Abiy. But also the Amara factor, that is a key point. Remember, the Amara, as they conquered the Tigrinya territory, did not raise the Ethiopian flag, but the imperial one, emphasizing the idea of not fighting only to regain dominance over the Tigrinyans, but to claim the ideal of a united Ethiopia according to their imperial and Christian vision. One of the keys to understanding the abandonment of the NDF forces from Tigray is not only linked to the strong military push of TPLF, but to the distance oneself from the Amara and the atrocity committed by them. The situation probably was exceeding the limit of embarrassment acceptable by Abiy, who at this point let the Tigrinian humiliate the Amhara, driving city after city to the border of Oromia. Let's go into to close in the last 3 minutes. The role of Prime Minister Abiy is central to understanding the conflict and to try to outline certain scenarios of the Horn of Africa. The whole country united is defending the nation in a coral effort, supported by Abiy's communicative war, structured in a national popular narrative, corroborated by some specific topic, such as recall the horrors of the colonial war against the Italian invaders, and appealing to the war of liberation to the great victory of Adwa. Second, focus on Tigray, leaving the Oromo front in the background. Third, promote the image of Tigrayans as invaders in Ethiopia, in the face of foreign interest. And last, spread the warning of rapid fall of Addis, the capital. Nothing true. Abiy's management of the communicative war is very accurate and well structured. From several sources, there is a talk of a conflict carefully prepared in the last 2 years, also of the military level, having secretly deployed in Eritrea troops of both the NDF and the Somali, waiting for the first Tigrinya move. In the coming month, we will better understood because some important events, such as the election in Somalia, which could lead to the non-re-election of Mohamed Formaggio, and the election in Kenya, another key country in the region. Let me close remembering that the international dimension of the conflict is latent on the directly operational level, but it is the foundation of the anti-colonial narrative of Abiy and substantial in support with arms supplies. In particular, the international actors involved, China, Qatar, Turkey, Emirates, Iran, will not easily accept losing the position acquired, even in the face of the large investment made, especially by Chinese. And this is a further element to be evaluated for the stability of the Horn of Africa. On the other hand, the very theme of stability is not objective. Stability can only be defined in terms of powerful interests that confront, not concerning the mere presence of or absence of dynamic process. In international politics, is not stable what is immobile, but it is stable what is recognized within an organized sphere of power. Therefore, in the Horn of Africa, we are witnessing a progressive replacement of power between the colonial countries of the old history, those of Western Europe, with those of new colonialism, well represented by the interest of China, Qatar, Turkey, Emirates, Iran, to which we can add Russia, which thanks also to a progressive withdrawal from the Sahel of France, the end of Barkhane mission, has acquired a greater power of penetration toward the center of Africa. If we can speak of instability, therefore, it is appropriate to do so because we assume a vision of replacing the old colonial influence with the new powers that, thanks to European foolishness, are being established quickly and effectively for the interested or support of the local governments, driving the war from a national and internal to a regional one. We are moving towards a change of the colonial front that is to different stability in which the European West is a loser without any advantage for the African countries. Thanks.
Thank you, Marco, so much. Again, I think it would be great if this conference and the opinion of experts can be heard to many directions, and we should think after this international scientific webinar whether to address all these things to European Union, to Secretary General or to directly to Prime Minister Ahmed by himself. So we should think, because it obviously that there is interesting solutions, there is good proposals, and now without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Akrap, and I would like to say that Dr. Akrap helped a lot basically, and he is the host. He gave us access to this WebEx. Dr. Akrap, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Darko. I'm co-host because you are the one, you are the spiritus movens. Excuse me. Well, I know that after distinguished speakers before me, that it's going to be very hard to say something new, but I try to focus myself on the possible consequences of on the wider area about these activities, about this conflict in wars in Ethiopia, because as all of you before me said, we in Europe, we were faced, as John said, with the breakout of Yugoslavia in 91. I remember, since I was a part of this conflict from the beginning, on the Croatian side, of course, that I remember myself that the diplomats from European Union that came and UN that came from the different countries to Croatia at that time, at Yugoslavia at that time also, they said that they have a first priority to stop possibility to split or to spill over this conflict and wars outside of the borders in Yugoslavia, and then second, to stop the conflicts and wars within the borders. And this is one of the basic points that I would like to just to share my opinions with you, because you know how it looks like. This is from last evening's situation from the live view map about the conflicts and war activities in Ethiopia. And you can see it, as you know, it also on the other side of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, there is a situation in Yemen, which is still very tense. And we can imagine situation what might be happen if this Bab el-Mandeb Strait is going to be closed due to the military activities and conflicts in this region. That is very easily that it can be split over. Yes, Djibouti is there, Eritrea is there, but we don't need to forget the way how Eritrea became independent. Also, the process within the Ethiopia is very tense, and we can also face it not directly what is going on in Ethiopia, but about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait with the Hormuz Strait, that we know what is going on since last several years, when Iranian activities are trying to misuse this position that they are controlling most of this Hormuz Strait in order to promote their political, security, economical, and other interests against the free traffic and free trade that through this Hormuz Strait is going on. And this is also a danger that if there is going to be continue these clashes and wars in Ethiopia, the crisis can spill over the borders, and we can see that there are several foreign and global players are there, especially on the side of the Ethiopian government, as United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Iran, China, and Russia, as my previous speaker said. And this is a very interesting position that you have those who are in usual cases the enemies, and they are confronting sides. They are more or less trying to support one side in order to have an influence and to use them as a proxy element to make their choices and to promote their interest in this area. This is a very important question that we need to be faced, and this is one of the basic reasons with the humanitarian reason why international community need to invest lots of efforts to try to stop these conflicts and wars. Those areas, as it was said, and those wars are producing the humanitarian crisis. We saw, especially what has happened in 2015 in Europe, when there was a practically controlled usage of the illegal migrations as a hybrid weapon or hybrid tool of the political influence to the societies and states in European Union. We can see now what Belarus government is trying to do with the illegal migrants also, and we don't need to forget that still the Balkan route via Greece and via Bulgaria and Romania is still very active, also with middle Mediterranean and West Mediterranean route for the Spanish enclaves in Morocco or in North Africa. Therefore, this is also a security crisis that is producing quite a lot of instabilities around Ethiopia, as Lazar said in one of his comments, that in Somalia we have here in the neighboring part of Ethiopia that could increase the level of activities, influence, and strength of the different Islamic terrorism groups. Also, what we don't need to forget, knowing that from the history that all the violence, all the conflicts that have ethnic questions in the basic of them produced terrible crimes, war crimes, atrocities, genocide, and other things, so that this is going to be a question that international community is going to be necessary to deal with for years after that. Also, what is very important is that it was discovered that this is not a new, but this is another point of the problem that we need to face with as a democratic society, is that the Facebook was again used as one of the vectors of one of the significant vectors of attack in order to spread the hate speech, information content that leaded to the violence, to conflicts, and even to the wars between the different groups. So most of the youth were spoken about these local activities in this area. I remember also, I will return myself in 91, when the European Union and the United Nations were turned themselves to the crisis in Iraq with the first Desert Storm operation. That was the time when the leaders of the Yugoslav People Army tried to make a coup d'etat and conducted the military activities and aggression against Croatia. So there is always a wider context that needs to be taken in account when we are talking about the analysis of the activities, hostile activities in the local level. So having in mind these conflicts in Ukraine and Belarus on the NATO eastern flank, having in mind what is going on with the relations with USA and China and Iran and Israel, probably the sides in Ethiopia can use this kind of opportunity in order to become more aggressive and more active in conducting wars. Also, those kind of conflict, this conflict and war has a wider negative implication that we need to take in account. What I would like to also add here is the fact what we were looking for during the Syrian crisis a few years ago is that there is always possible to run the process that was similar to the Dayton peace agreement that stopped the war, stopped the atrocities, but trying to make a basic for some kind of the mutual agreement in order to stop the conflicts and wars. There is no price for peace that international community needs to be paid, and everything else needs to be processed. Also, what I see now in Ethiopia is something that was part of the political processes in the soul territory of the Europe at the end of the Cold War, when the different multinational states were divided between themselves on a national level, on an ethnic level, creating the national states, like, for example, several countries in former Yugoslavia, or Czechoslovakia, or the breakup of this former Soviet Socialist of United Republics, and then integration of those countries in the European Union in Europe, but something that can be have in mind in African Union, as John said. So those kind of experiences that we have in the recent history, I think that we have to learn from them and trying to apply them, but only with the strong support of international community. Darko, thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. So we have two more speakers on our list. We have Dr. Barak Bux, and we have from Hungary, Captain Akos Trazkai. So I would like to give floor to Dr. Barak Bux. Floor is yours.
Okay, first of all of you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Although this talk is about Ethiopia, I chose the Egyptian prison because I think it has a vital weight on regional security. My short lecture...
We don't see the presentation. We don't see the presentation, just your
PowerPoint. Start the presentation.
Okay, I did.
Open it.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, so I want to talk about the Grand Ethiopian Dam, but from the Egyptian prison. We must understand one thing, that in the eyes of Egypt, the Nile is the lifeline of the country. With no Nile, there is no Egypt. When we study courses at the university about Egypt, we allocate 1 or 2 lessons at least on the history of the pharaohs and the Nile, which is practically the whole life of Egypt through religion, through agriculture and everything. As such, Egypt relates to any real or even a threat potential on the Nile as a threat to the own international security of Egypt. Now we must ask ourselves, are there any other watersheds in Egypt? There are not. I retrieved the research by 2 scholars, El-Nari and Doloshitz. They tried to see what the situation is about with using the Mediterranean Sea or other oases that has watersheds in Egypt. Now, global warming and climate changes decreased and made this water even much more saltier than they were before. Hence, the highest importance, more than ever, of the Nile. These are the pictures of the Grand Renaissance Dam. This is how it looks like. As we can see, you know, there isn't any other experience there are own eyesight. We can see that practically Ethiopia controls the origins of the Nile. The whole situation begins as something very scary in Egyptian eyes. A short history in 1 or 2 minutes. The construction of this massive Grand Ethiopian Dam, which was called at the beginning the Millennium Dam, began in 2011, a decade ago. It's located 40 kilometers east of Sudan. And a year ago, Ethiopia began to accelerate the second phase of filling the dam. In June, a few months ago, Egypt had acknowledged receiving a letter. Ethiopia notified Egypt about the finishing of the second filling of this dam, but Egypt objected. Egypt allied with Sudan in order to form some sort of a resistance to this maneuver. In early October 2021, the UN Security Council had issued a statement calling all parties to acknowledge a mutually acceptable and binding agreement. As Egypt and Sudan responded positively, then Ethiopia rejected it. It said it will not recognize any claim raised on the basis of aforementioned statement. The mediations continued all this time, but they did not succeed, albeit interventions on behalf of the US of A, the African Union, culminating with Tunisia as a key member of the Union. There were efforts to mediate the project, and they still continue, but without any success. Ethiopia had arrived at the target of fulfilling the second filling of this dam on July 19th, 2021. And it did so because it wanted to use the rainy season in Ethiopia. Now I'm going to talk about the Egyptian prism. When Egyptian is going to take a decision, to arrive at a decision how to react, it can choose one of 2 possible parallel lines, either diplomacy or military response. Egypt tried the diplomatic line. This prism is consisted of negotiations by many key top officials of Egypt. They started with the Egyptian allocated Water Resources and Irrigation Minister. They have an office. His name is Muhammad Abdelati. He promoted diplomacy in both parallel lines, either internationally or with his Ethiopian counterpart. He talked to Miss Inger Anderson from an equivalent body at the UN Environmental Program Office. He tried to persuade her about the importance of this thing to Egypt. On the other hand, he sent his Ethiopian counterpart a letter saying that there is an agreement from 2015. He urged him to acknowledge this agreement, but Ethiopia did not want to acknowledge that. If I'm going higher in the rank of Egyptian officials, we can see Sameh Shukri, the foreign minister. He met his Sudanese counterpart, a woman named Mariam al-Sadiq al-Mahdi. He wanted to coordinate positions against Ethiopia, a unified front. The Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, attempted and still attempts to arrive at some arrangements regarding this water division. Up till now, it did not succeed. He's trying to persuade the African Union representative, the chairman from Congo, Felix, and his name is a bit complicated, Tshisekedi. Now, if these negotiations will not succeed, and the signs are that they are not, then Egypt is now signaling with a military response. First of all, a series of maneuvers, as my colleague Shaul Shai noted. In the former 2 years, Egypt and Sudan maneuvered 3 times. The third maneuver was in June 2021, and pay attention to the name, Guardians of the Nile. The name is similar to the operation that Israel had a month before, in May, against Hamas in Gaza, Guardian of the Walls. You may ask yourselves if they copied the name or took some copyrights from the Israeli definition of this operation. I don't know. This third exercise signed and signaled to Ethiopia that Egypt and Sudan opened a unified alliance that can threaten whomever threatens the origin of the Nile. In addition, throughout 2021, Egypt bought 30 Rafale fighters, jets from France, in a contract of $4.5 billion, not million, but $1 billion. These jets were added to 24 former jets, which means they have 55 Rafale jets that can operate, if Egypt wants, in Ethiopia. This buildup is a signal by Egypt to Ethiopia about a possible military retaliation. Now, in international relations, we say that we form signals according to proclamations that may reflect our seriousness. And this leads me to conclusions, and I'm finishing my presentation. First of all, Egypt considers the Ethiopian GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, as a threat on its water source, it's a threat on its national security. As such, Egypt will be willing to take any necessary decision in order to remove the threat. It embarked on a global diplomatic pressure, yet, should negotiations fail, I do estimate it will consider seriously a military operation. The Egyptian signals are not on a blank space. They really mean that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barak. The last on our list is Captain Akos. Captain Akos, floor is yours, please.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon for everyone. I know the time frame is quite tense, so I would like I don't want to give a presentation. I just would like to initiate a dispute or just a topic. That the first question is, and I'm so curious for your opinion, that what do you think, what's happening in Ethiopia? Because we can call it crisis, we can call it conflict. Can we call it civil war? Or can we call it proxy war? I'm so curious for your opinion. And that's my second question or comment, that according to the news, especially from the Ethiopian media and Ethiopian news, that Egypt is quite offensive. I mean that they are supporting militias and groups against the Ethiopian government. Of course, Egypt is denied. What do you think? What is the interest of Egypt? Because on one hand, it could be positive to Egypt, a crisis in Ethiopia, but on the other hand, if Ethiopia, let's call it, fall apart or fall in a chaos, it's much more. It could be cause a turbulence in the region. So, what do you think? What is the interest of Egypt? It's weak but unite Ethiopia, or a chaos in Ethiopia? And how could we categorize the situation now in Ethiopia? can we call it civilian war? Can we call it insurgency? Can we call it maybe proxy war? This is the I'm so curious for your opinion, and I think that we can open a short dispute or discussion about this topic.
Thank you, Captain Athos. From my point of view, this is an internal civil war, because it is within the border, within the national border of Ethiopia. There is no foreign force attacking like it used to be with Eritrea and with some other sovereign states. So it is within the border of one state. It's internal conflict, and I think Professor John Levy, he's international lawyer. He can give us a clear clarification what is exactly on his view as an international lawyer, which kind of the conflict it is. John, can you give us the answer? Professor Levy, are you with us?
Yes, just to see if my video, there we are.
Good.
I would say one thing we look at under international law is there a non-international armed conflict? Has a NIAC been declared? And normally, International Committee of the Red Cross or some other Swiss organization might declare that, and they've not been very good about doing things like that. So there obviously is an armed conflict, and we'd like to get the Geneva Convention and the other laws of war applicable, but the International Committee of the Red Cross, other organizations, they're very reluctant ever to go in and define these kind of conflicts. So the conflict can be any and all of these things, but right now, because there is not even a NIAC, a non-international armed conflict declared, I'd say it's purely a domestic dispute of some sort, even though we have, obviously an international component, such as Eritrea in there. But I see Greg Copley, he might have something for you there.
Indeed, John, I appreciate your comments, but in fact, it is very much an internationalized conflict. There have been numerous governments, and particularly the Egyptian government historically, providing weapons, funds, trainers, intelligence, and the like to run this. So yes, as the captain said, it's partly a proxy war, but it's also a war which has involved direct intervention. The Sudanese armed forces, with the support of the Egyptian armed forces, still occupy areas of Ethiopia close to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And what's significant is that the pretext which Dr. Barak Books so ably presented, the pretext of war on the basis of intervention against the GERD is really fallacious. The Sudanese government itself in recent months acknowledged that the second filling of the dam did not reduce the water flow of the Blue Nile to Sudan and on to Egypt in any way over previous years. So that's part of it. And the other reality is that the population rise of Egypt, almost quadrupling in the past few decades, is what is making the worst demands for water on the Egyptian government. And the Nile cannot be expected to increase its flow. So you destroy the dam, and what? You get more water out of Lake Tana? I don't think so. It doesn't happen like that. God will decide how much water is going down. There are options which Egyptian scientists have raised, including diverting some of the upper Congo River over to the White Nile, and that whole process and the engineering has begun on and off over the past century. So that option is always there. But fundamental to all of this is the failure of the Aswan High Dam, which was so brutish in its Stalinist approach to dam building, and we're seeing the consequences of that elsewhere in the world, both in China and in Central Asia, with the Stalinist dams drying up the Aral Sea. But what we have is the Aswan Dam has stopped the annual flow of siltation from the Amhara highlands down into the Nile Delta, which had traditionally refreshed the agricultural soil of Egypt. So that's no longer been happening for the last 50 years since the Aswan Dam was built. You have then the water regulation through the Aswan Dam and the vast Lake Nasser behind it is such that it has meant a constant water level in the Nile on the lower side of the Aswan Dam. And what that has meant is that the water table of Lower Egypt has risen considerably. And you could say, well, that must be a good thing for agriculture, but in fact it isn't, because it has brought salinity up from the lower levels of the soil, and this has not been compensated for by the siltation, which normally used to enrich the soil. And what it's also done, it's started to flood some of the underground Egyptian historical artifacts. So this is going to dramatically impact Egypt's tourist industry in the coming years. So what are the solutions for General Sisi? His first instance was to achieve a peace agreement with Ethiopia, and he was in fact very good about that. And I know he doesn't realize that the killing the dam is going to solve Egypt's problems, but he needs a political solution very, very quickly, and he has to blame somebody. And the Egyptian media has consistently blamed the Nile as being the only legitimate concern of Egypt. And even in a book I wrote in the 1990s, I reiterated the Egyptian government's mantra that the only casus belli for Egypt, the only absolute one, was interference with the flow of Nile waters. But the reality is that Egypt has not addressed the issue of proper water usage. It's not using its water, even from the Aswan Dam, very effectively. Its irrigation techniques have been shoddy at best and unproductive, and have not addressed the issues of salinization of the water, nor of other methods. It has to go to some major desalination programs, just as Saudi Arabia and Israel have done, and Australia for that matter. But what we are seeing is a false narrative being perpetuated by Egypt to bring the international community into support to destroy Ethiopia. And you have to say that Egypt's historical antagonism toward Ethiopia, which goes back to numerous wars during the Ottoman period in Ethiopia, which by the way Egypt lost, is about control of the Nile waters, but it's also about control of the Red Sea. And so far, the US State Department, British Foreign Commonwealth Office and the like have fallen into line with Egypt's demands that the world supports its position, simply because Egypt threatens, the world with the control over the Suez Canal. The reality is that a much more rational approach needs to be taken, and certainly the blind obedience to following Cairo by the US and London is not going to improve anybody's lot. And indeed, General Sisi has made it clear that even if he gets all the support in the world from the Europeans and the Americans, he will not ever allow Egypt to once again open up to foreign domination as it had from the French, the British, the Ottomans, the Russians and Soviets and the like. So it's time for a rational discussion as to what will solve Egypt's problems and stop some of this pressure, including Egypt's funding of the Oromo Liberation Front in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Any more comments or intervention?
Yes, if I can, may, with your permission, Darko.
Of course.
The thing about the Nile and Egypt, I must note, it's more than a religious, romantic, national pride, everything all together, combined all together. Which means even if there isn't any threat, in the eyes of the Egyptian honor, the possibility that somebody can even potentially threaten them is a casus belli for war. Period.
Yep.
It's a matter of national pride. And if they do see and estimate that there is a possibility of damaging the flow of water, they are willing to act, to do something. I must put one other sentence with your permission. The coup d'etat in Sudan is resolved plus minus. It stalled a little bit the Egyptian response, but nowadays the situation is stable, so this option is valid again. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. So if there is no more comments, we are coming to the end of this session. I would like to call all of you to contribute with your articles before February 25th. If you like to write on Ethiopian crisis, we finished just with this year with the last issue of Security Science Journal. So we feel full 2 years of existence. Tomorrow is a central celebration. We are preparing tomorrow a little celebration here at the Institute. I wish next year that you are all in Belgrade. I hope this corona will stop and will release us for with this pain that we cannot see each other in person. But anyhow, the next year, we are starting next year with the first issue, and we will collect the papers for Mediterranean security as well as paper for Ethiopian security. And it will be the first issue of our journal. It's a journal of all of you, basically, because more or less you are all in the journal. It's our baby. So it will be the first issue for the 3rd year of existence. And when this issue is published, I would like to ask Dr. Akrap to apply for the Erich Plus indexation. So it will be something. We are already in index Copernicus, but Erich Plus and Scopus is let's say 1 degree from a Web of Science. So I would like to ask all of you to contribute for the next our issue next year. It is I think it's our let's say great pleasure and honor to have all of your article for the first issue for the next year, because it is little history we are creating with our journal. So gentlemen, thank you so much, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and hope to see you next our conference. It will be perhaps the end of February, and it will be dedicated to Southeast Europe, Ukraine, Serbia, Bosnia, all unintegrated territory, and the possible war in Ukraine, because according to our intelligence, the first week of Olympic Games in China, Winter Olympic Games in 4th February, it will be the week of Russia-Ukraine confrontation, and perhaps a confrontation between Serbs and Kosovars in Kosovo, or of course Bosnia. We have some kind of the information that all 3 states, like Ukraine, Serbia, with Kosovo plus Bosnia, will be the basically battleground and a victim of geopolitics, because US and Russia will confront not directly. They're going to use proxy territories. I think it will be the right place and right momentum to discuss how to preserve European security, how to work more closely to integrate all these 3 states in European, the number of above everything in the European Union and European integration. And of course, we're going to monitor the situation in former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Montenegro, and definitely in front of us, as someone said, time of peace is over. The conflict is already in the air. We are just waiting this kind of the kinetic war, real war, unfortunately, to happen. So thank you so much, and as I said, Merry Christmas and all the best to you and your family for the new year.
Merry
If
Christmas.
we will survive the incoming nuclear war, see you in February.
If we can't get together in person, Darko, you need to send us each some Slivovitz.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Bye-bye, brothers.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, brother.